This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to the April 10th South Whitehall Township Planning Commission meeting. Everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Manhart, would you like to do the roll call?
Yes. Trevor Dombach. Tim Dugan.
Here.
Todd Farringer. Present. Ryan Height.
Present.
Diane Kelly. Not present. Mark Luth.
Present.
David Wilson.
Present.
4 members sufficient for a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Manhart, would you like to do the meeting rules?
Yes. Rules for participation and etiquette during Planning Commission meetings. For an orderly meeting wherein all attendees may be able to fully participate, we ask that you adhere to the following rules. In order that both in-person and remote attendees may hear all comments or questions, all in-person attendees will be required to use microphones at all times. We request that remote attendees please mute your microphone or telephone to avoid background noise that may cause interference in the meeting and make it difficult for others to hear. Staff may mute the microphones of remote attendees if needed. Public questions and comments will be taken at periodic intervals throughout the agenda. Unless otherwise permitted by the chairman, residents shall limit their comment to no more than 5 minutes. Chairman or vice chairman, as the case may be, may extend comment beyond 5 minutes in his or her discretion. The chairman may rule out of order scandalous comments, irrelevant and redundant comments, and comments designed to disrupt the meeting. For in-person attendees, please sign in on the appropriate sign-in sheet. Please raise your hand to be recognized, then move to the podium when directed. State your name, address, and comment or question. For remote attendees, the chat box feature will be active throughout the meeting. If you have a comment or question, please type your full name and address in the chat box. When you are recognized and so directed, please unmute your microphone and state your comment or question. Mute your microphone when done. For those who are accessing the meeting by phone only, staff will periodically ask for caller comments and unmute any callers. Callers must identify their name and address prior to making a comment. Your cooperation and in adherence to these rules will ensure an orderly and respectful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to make note of township staff and consultants who are attending in person and online. Online, we have April Wilk, Land Development Coordinator, Jennifer Aldifer, Director of Legal Services, Aaron Bett, Township Engineer with the Pidcock Company, is online as well. In person, we have Dave Manhart, Director of Community Development, and Chris Stroller, Long Range Planner. All right, we're on agenda item number 3, review and approval of the February 13th, 2025 meeting minutes. Does anyone have any comments on that? I see we don't have a copy of it in our packet.
It was in the packets for distribution. You don't have the packets in front of you, do you? We forgot to print them out.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, guys.
I mean, they're all recorded. Does
I have them up here if you guys want to take a few minutes
Yep.
to look through them.
I make a motion to approve?
I'll second.
Do we have any other comments? Anyone online? Seems to be
Brian.
no.
I'm fine with it. Yep.
All right. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? None opposed? So moved. All right. We're on agenda item number 4, subdivision review. The United Church of Christ Greenwalds was removed from the agenda, so there's no subdivision review items on the agenda tonight. So we'll move on to agenda item number 5, Planning Commission Annual Report. Mr. Stroller, it's all yours.
Thank you. Sorry. We looked at the annual report when we met last in February. We ran through the report and there were a few comments made. We have made some slight adjustments to the report based on those comments, and the report has been distributed in your packet. Unless anyone has any specific questions, we would be asking the commission for a motion to accept the report and forward this to the Board of Commissioners for approval.
I know I met with you, Chris, and Dave earlier in the week. I don't have any questions. Does anyone else on the Planning Commission have any questions or comments or want to go over anything in more detail?
I have one question. At the very top of the report, if you could scroll back towards the top, Chris, is there a way we can add Lehigh County to that? Just because when these get into where I work at the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, we submit them to the state as well. So it helps track on that end.
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, I think we could probably put it in this sort of preamble here.
Yeah.
So, or at the top where it says
Oh,
South
yeah.
Whitehall Township, comma, Lehigh County, comma, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Yeah. Probably make that 2 line.
Yeah. Good catch, Brian.
Other than that, it's really good. Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone here?
None.
All right. So, anyone else online in the public that has any comments or questions? Chris, is there like a chat that anyone?
Yeah, so you guys are seeing what I'm seeing. The
Okay.
chat is open
Okay.
and no one has
Okay.
put anything in.
All right. So other than adding Lehigh County, I think we could add that as a condition. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make that, or I'll second. Either way.
All right. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? None opposed. So moved.
Let me just clarify who made the motion, because for those of us online, I don't know that I heard it correctly.
Brian made the motion. Mark Luth seconded it.
Thank you. That makes it easier for the minutes.
All right. Agenda item number 6, comprehensive plan reexamination report. Mr. Stroller.
Thank you. Every year around March, since the comprehensive plan was adopted, we have started to look at the reexamination report as kind of an exercise to more so talk about what we're doing with the comprehensive plan and take pause and say, is there anything that we need to adjust or make note of with the comprehensive plan? I sent out a draft to the Planning Commission a few weeks ago, and then in that draft, we also released a survey to you guys. Thank you to everyone who participated in the survey. The intent of that was to get some feedback on what I've taken from the initial draft and put together more of a final product. Just for kind of I think this is the first time we're looking at it this year in the meeting. So I can kind of run through it a little bit about what the report is, especially for those online. So it talks again about the comprehensive plan. One of the main goals in the comprehensive plan was to make it implementable and also to be able to track that implementation. That's certainly something we heard of in the beginning of the comprehensive plan process was what have we accomplished from the first one? So this reexamination report is an effort for us to look at that and also have a kind of quick summary of where we are as far as progress. The Planning Commission looks at this every year, updates it, and then we forward it to the Board of Commissioners. You can see the implementation piece of it is a big part, especially for us as staff, to kind of have that ongoing list of what we've accomplished and hopefully what is next on the docket. Just as some summary, we have sort of the, in the implementation plan, we talk about what elements of the comprehensive plan are related to that. There's priority and timeline specified for those items. And then in the following table, I have some color coding just to give you an idea of, what we've completed as it was initially intended from the comprehensive plan. That's in blue. The green items are what we're either working on or they're on track and we're putting pieces together for that. Yellow are some of the items that we think are teed up, ready to go, but we'll need some official action to start working on those or to move forward on a piece of those. There are a few things in red. I think I highlighted some of the areas that may have been high priority and short term from the comp plan, just to sort of talk about why those aren't either green or yellow yet. And then the gray and white we haven't worked on as of yet. The initial comprehensive plan, I'm just going to switch to a 2-page view quickly because it's a little easier to see everything together. For those online, can you see that okay?
I can, Chris.
Thank you. So we initially had 26 implementation items from the comprehensive plan. A lot of these were pretty broad in nature, as far as, active transportation was its own topic, and the idea there is to create an active transportation plan. So we have a number of items that have been completed from the onset of what we set out to do, a number of items that are in progress, including some of those planning efforts. And then what we'll do at the end is, I think what we'd like to see from staff is we started to break down these big items into more tangible actions and give that a little bit more of a prioritization process so that we can move forward on some of the ones that aren't highlighted and better understand why some of these that are in progress, what steps we need to do to actually complete certain tasks. The next part of the report talks about really kind of the active projects we have going on or ongoing regional initiatives, things that are important of note that have to do with implementation. And kind of just quickly summarized in here, the boards, commission, councils rewrite, that's something that was looked at early on in the comprehensive plan to say we have a number of different commissions. The way that some of these are organized in our township code, some of them were created in the 1960s, some of them were updated, a few years ago. Some of them are very specific to duties. Some have a little bit more nuance to them. So we wanted to kind of look at trying to be very consistent in the Board of Commissioners duties and responsibilities, the Planning Commission duties and responsibilities, as it's written in the Township Code. The other big piece of this was consolidating some of the environmental related boards and commissions we had. So last year we updated the Article 5, the Environmental Advisory Council, to address some of that. We also updated the Landscape and Shade Tree Commission and took some pieces out of that for what's now Chapter 33 trees, that talks more specifically about shade trees. And this article is specific to the duties of the commission. So this is kind of an ongoing one. Wanted to highlight this because I think there's definitely work to do here, and you'll see later some of the recommendations from staff is to maybe start to move forward on addressing some of the other articles that need to be edited. And the challenge here is it's a bit of a puzzle of you have to kind of work on one to make it fit in the code, and there's a lot of administrative piece to it. The next item is the transportation plan. So this is kind of the broad transportation plan. We'll talk more about this at the end. I think we actually wanted to run through a little bit of the plan with you guys, but really this more comprehensive plan tackles the 3 implementation items of active transportation, safety, and this actual recommendation of T3 for having a township transportation plan, a summary that's just related to transportation and the infrastructure of transportation for the township. So this is ongoing. We're getting ready to adopt the first phase of that, but we can talk more at the end. The South Whitehall Landscapes Plan we've talked a lot about before. That was adopted September of last year. That's the township's resource preservation plan, ag, natural resources, historic, and all of that coming together in open space as well. That's been adopted. We've been working closely with the EAC on moving some of those implementation items forward, especially in kind of using the classifications of open space that were developed through that plan, trying to get those incorporated into township codes so that we can have a better understanding of open space in relation to saldo requirements and zoning and so forth. We'll also see a lot of this stuff from the resource end integrated into the township official map. The historic resource survey was a recommendation out of the landscapes plan to actually identify and survey potential historic resources in the township. We worked with Jeff Marshall, a historic preservation consultant, on that last year. That survey is now complete. We had, I think, like 140 items initially. We've whittled that list down. We are preparing a report, a summary report of that, which will be presented to the Board of Commissioners, and that will lead to a documented historic resource inventory for the township, which will allow the township to designate what sites, properties, and structures and so forth are locally significant to the township's history. And as part of that, that will allow us to look at any sort of ordinances or preservation programs that can be developed to preserve those specific items. That will also be incorporated into the official map. Solid waste and recycling evaluation. This was an assessment developed out of the new solid waste and recycling contract, I believe from 2 years ago, that we saw a significant increase in price, and that other municipalities in the area are also seeing those significant increases in price and cost from solid waste collection. So what we looked at was kind of evaluating the routing and the schedule and the operations of solid waste collection, and are using that to better plan for future contracts, see if there's areas that we can make recommendations to the routing and kind of the process within our existing contract. And that will lead into hopefully some future initiatives around recycling as well, to see if there's ways that we can not only improve recycling, but also cut down cost of outsourcing recycling. And then the Jordan Valley open space overlay. I think we did a presentation on this earlier this year. And this is in response to the landscapes plan and kind of one of the strategies for preserving open space, utilizing the township codes and looking at zoning. This overlay zone would cover a large area, pretty much almost a third of the township in the northern tier of the township, where most of the resources identified in the landscapes plan are located. And there's limited development there, but there's also a lot of unprotected open space that could be developed. So the thought here is to guide some complementary type of development patterns, give better context to how development can be incorporated into some of the historic aspects of that unique landscape, be more complementary to some of the older neighborhoods or some of our crossroads villages and so forth, and to utilize more cluster-based zoning to preserve more open space than typically required through standard subdivision. This overlay being an option for applicants or landowners also would require a little bit more of a review and a little bit more standards than typical zoning. Anything that is under this overlay wouldn't have to abide by design guidelines that we are developing with a contracted architect. Again, trying to have that cohesiveness with this sort of special, unique area of the township. So this one we're really excited about. We're working on this a lot to get a draft ready to go. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks here, something to review. And we hope to get this implemented to take a lot of what we talked about in the landscapes plan, not only put it into practice, but give kind of an opportunity for development in that area to utilize this and accomplish several goals.
That whole area is north, by the high school and all that farmland.
Yes. Yeah. Everything pretty much Mock Chunk Road. I mean, it's to the eastern edge of the township, all the way to the western edge of the township. But you think of the Mock Chunk Road area all the way over to the high school, all the way through even to 309. We have this going out to even the apple butter area of the township. There's some kind of northern, the northwest part of the township where there's some rural land up there and undeveloped land up north of, is that St. Joe's, I think. Mm-hmm. So it covers a large area. And the idea here is it allows for more of a collective approach to preserving open spaces that are of higher value and directing development into areas that are better accommodated to support that. The Regional Climate Action Plan is an effort spearheaded by Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, and they're working with a number of partners, and that it actually extends north with Carbon County and east with Warren County, New Jersey. This is looking at they did a greenhouse gas inventory over the past few years, and it identified a couple of strategies looking at reducing greenhouse gases. So this climate action plan is supposed to be an approach to that. And they're looking at a couple of different sectors, including industrial, commercial, residential, water, wastewater, solid waste, and ag. Lehigh Valley Planning Commission has had a number of workshops looking for stakeholder feedback and so forth to this. So this is an ongoing effort. This is really an important initiative for the region, but it gives us something as a municipality to also pay attention to some of the recommendations out of that. Where does that apply to something that would be within our wheelhouse? And it's good guidance for if we were to look at anything related to a climate plan to sort of follow some of the guidance from the regional initiative. Similar to that, kind of a regional effort right now, the Lehigh Valley Housing Strategy. Dave, I don't know if you want to talk about this one.
Yeah, so the Lehigh Valley Housing Strategy is initiative essentially funded through Lehigh County for the Lehigh Valley. So Lehigh Valley Planning Commission is developing a housing strategy for the valley. They had a symposium a couple months ago at DeSales. It was very well attended. Great information was provided. They've been working with Urban Land Institute to get some of that information out. So you get the kind of a broad perspective, not just planners, you're getting developers and real estate folks all involved in that conversation. They've had a series of stakeholder interviews, kind of roundtable discussions. So there's some really good work coming out of this, and we're kind of just keeping a pulse on things and being involved when we can.
Is there pretty significant housing shortage still? It's pretty substantial.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like the shortage is kind of on the ends, so it's putting the pressure on the middle. So the people that want to buy up are buying lower, so squeezing everything down, kind of squeezing everything. Is one of the general things, but one of the comments that came up was how long the development process is. One of the developers, he was bragging that he had a project that he just finished and it only took him 7 years. So it's a long process and it can be daunting, especially with the size of projects. So that's one thing that they're looking at. I think there's been some discussion at the state level as well. There was a bill that was talking about trying to supersede municipal zoning by mandating that, paraphrasing and probably exaggerating, but multifamily is a permitted use in every residential zone. So that was something that was floated out through the legislator, and I don't think it didn't get very far. Mostly because it takes away the local power. There is a need, and hopefully working with the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, they'll come up with some strategies and things that communities across the valley can work on to help satisfy some of that unmet need.
Yeah, Dave, we have a housing shortage already, and we're growing, so it's only going to get worse. That's the main takeaway I took from, like, we're one of the few regions in the state that's actually growing, and we already have a housing deficit. And that's why apartments are so popular, because, well, people can't even afford, like you said, they're buying down or buying up out of their limit, or they can't find high-end housing like they can afford, so they squeeze in the middle. So it's a significant problem. I'm glad you're involved.
Thank you.
One minor typo in the second paragraph. Pools.
Thank you.
Oozle.
Thank you. The next part of this, the reexamination report, we have a series of ongoing or the same questions every year, and talks more about kind of what's changed. I'm glad you talked about the process. That's something that we heard from the Planning Commission in the survey related to these questions. So they ask about, are there major problems or issues with land development in the township since the comprehensive plan? Typically, this is, a no. It's only been 2 years since the comp plan. We haven't really seen much change, but some of the comments that we heard from all of you were similar to that, and it seems to be taking longer. And I think we experienced it here as projects come in, that projects just seem to be taking a while to be approved. And there's a number of reasons that could be. I think some of it is certainly there's the kind of low hanging fruit is gone in this township. Some of the parcels that are still available are a little bit more challenging to develop. So inherently, there's a little bit more to look at. I think we, as staff, and I think you all as a planning commission also recognize some of the challenges just in the procedural process. So we certainly take note of that. And we want to fit that into some of the implementation and try to look at what are some of the things that we can do in our process to keep the level of review the same, keep the intent the same, but maybe try to figure out where those log jams are.
Yeah, we're looking at timing of submissions and required notice, kind of the fixed dates that can potentially have some room to shift one way or the other, where we can allow for reviews and responses. Because right now it's like you come to a planning commission meeting, you get the responses, you go back next month and you try and meet the resubmission deadline, and you have only a week to do that. So there's things that we're looking at updating with Saldo and some of our deadlines that hopefully will help some of the process go a little.
The other kind of just update about what's changed. Like I said, there hasn't been a lot of new projects. Ridge Farms is probably still the biggest project in the township happening. Phase 1A is now complete with the St. Luke's Medical Office Building, and phases 1B and 1C are approved. So those are slowly moving forward. Just also to note, the 309 Tillman Interchange reconstruction project has started, so that just has kind of a big impact on the township, less so from a land development perspective, but just something of note. And I don't know if anyone else has any other comments on major problems or issues or any big changes related to this question, but I tried to summarize in there what we heard from all of you.
From my perspective, a thing that comes up often, as you're talking about less units of land that are available to be developed, and even pre-existing lots having higher density or other disturbance on them, it's infrastructure, stormwater and transportation. Those are finite limitations or issues. We definitely see that with the stormwater, especially in concert with state regulations changing as weather has changed. So that's a difficulty that I see, when somebody's bringing a plan in, is, over the last 30 years, there's been a lot of changes in stormwater control and regulation. So as we get smaller and smaller parcels or less parcels that are open and available, I wouldn't say it's a more critical eye. It's just that there's less available area.
There's less opportunity to,
disperse,
yeah.
Those issues that come up with transportation bottlenecks as well as stormwater mitigation. It's not on the township. It's just,
No, and
you know,
that's, yeah, this
square
is
feet
just
available kind of
thing-
an issue.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The next question kind of just follows up on that. If there are existing problems, have they been reduced, increased? So for this question, I really kind of talked about what Dave mentioned of how we can kind of address that, what we think some of the, as far as what's in our ability as the staff and the planning commission, and that's kind of maybe updating some of those notice requirements and looking at the timing. There were some comments about, so we adopted a sidewalk deferral call-in policy a few years ago. As new projects come in, there's been a lot of look at sidewalks moving away from being granted waivers and being granted more deferrals, or requiring the sidewalks. One of the things that is becoming not so much a sticking point, but when we're looking at the kind of connected network of sidewalks, we have this policy to call it in, but it's very challenging to call in a sidewalk. Oftentimes you're looking at maybe the fourth, fifth iteration of the property owner. It is never, something that we look forward to say now, after this development has been in for so long, we want you to put in a sidewalk. I think some of the response to this is, I'd say, with the direction the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners has been going in, moving away from the waivers, having those deferrals now with our transportation plan and having kind of the guidance on what would be a good priority active transportation network, some of that could help justify or at least support areas of priority sidewalks to call in. And that's actually something reflected in some of the action items. Is it might be a worthwhile exercise of this board and staff to start to look at what would be out of those sidewalk deferrals that we have lingering out there in respect to our active transportation network. What would be some areas that if we wanted to start calling in sidewalks, where should we direct some of that to support essentially the Board of Commissioners, who I believe is tasked with initiating that call in, to say that this is the reason why it's a priority and we're not just pulling things out of nowhere.
And one of the thoughts behind the deferrals was to, instead of piecemealing some sidewalks, which could result in sidewalks not lining up and whatnot, when you have a couple properties in a row, call them all in, and then they can be constructed at the same time and make sure at the property lines that they're tying in correctly. So yeah, I think
So-
that's a great idea to,
We did,
have a
the planning
check-in
commission did recommend a call-in. So it was I forget the address, but it was on Crackersport Road. They were rehabbing the truck facility, and the planning commission didn't waive the sidewalks and recommended calling in. There were deferrals on either side. Recommended calling in the deferrals. That was what prompted us to develop the policy. Followed the policy, and the ultimate decision was not to call in those adjacent sidewalks, partly because we didn't have the entire network.
Mhm.
So it was granted, instead of, I'm just throwing numbers out, instead of a 100-foot piece and then deferring it and having a 400-foot piece that didn't go to anywhere. So it was kind of, we have to do better when we start thinking about these call-ins, about the context and how it relates to the bigger picture of the net.
And that's a big benefit of having the active transportation plan, is we have that kind of guiding network of what, based on all of the input from that, where we would like to see connectivity. And a lot of that could be just connectivity through sidewalks that don't exist, sidewalks that are deferred, and sidewalks that are in place. So it's kind of that little roadmap of maybe where those connections could be part of the rest of the network, or to say, yeah, these are even kind of in our grand scheme of things, these would still be isolated, and maybe it's better off just looking at internal circulation or something like that. The final question, talking about significant changes to the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. I don't think anything has really changed as far as the underlying goals of the plan, but we wanted to make note of the adoption of the landscapes plan and how that complemented with the Environmental Advisory Council kind of being recreated now gives a lot more focus to resource preservation goals that were talked about in the comp plan. It gives a lot more specificity to what we're doing with some of those kind of higher level goals where we talked about, yes, open space and identification and preservation of resources. So now we can start to think about, as I mentioned earlier, putting that into township codes, updating the official map, and so forth. Similar to that, kind of a supplement to the comprehensive plan is the South Whitehall Transportation Plan, which we'll look at a little bit tonight. We'll do the same thing. It's going to kind of guide that both from the active transportation side, which we talked about the benefits there, also from sort of our priority safety corridors and areas that we want to direct some focus for capital improvement investments, looking for grants and outside funding to try to prioritize something that's not just in a normal maintenance schedule and so forth. On that same note, I just wanted to kind of mention how for the past few years, we've kind of been looking at certain grant sources and identifying projects and so forth. There's always changes at all levels of grants and funding priorities and so forth. So just as a kind of note to the Planning Commission and to staff, as we're sort of developing, especially from a long range perspective, these larger projects, these 3 to 5 year projects, to be flexible in maybe what we're looking at and the scope of what we're trying to accomplish with funding, just to be able to identify multiple sources of funding or pivot where some funding sources might not be as available and others might pop up as priorities. So with that, it all kind of comes down to, then there's the final recommendations. So this is a good kind of spot to hear from you guys on recommendations for the reexamination report. What we talked about earlier on the implementation is from the comp plan, the implementation was very broad as far as the topics. We had a lot built into the actions there, many of which have been accomplished. So we wanted to kind of break down a list, and it's a pretty big list, but it's certainly been helpful for us as staff to have this at our fingertips to sort of say, this is where we're going in the next couple of months. This is something to think about for next year and so forth. So the recommendation that I put into here, and I want to hear from you guys, is to maybe adopt this sort of broken down new implementation summary. And from the survey that was sent out, I went ahead and gave some timelines and priorities to some of those actions based on the feedback from all of you. And this kind of gives us something to get some direction for what projects or what initiatives we would be bringing forward to the Board of Commissioners for approval to start working on. And it also gives you guys an idea of what, as far as your role in some of these actions, what you might see coming down the line in a few months and so forth, especially on kind of like the saldo updates, zoning updates and so forth, implementing some of those items. So I wanted to kind of hear from the group as far as recommendations. If you wanted to highlight any of the, actions, we can do that. But the main portion of this would be the recommendation for the reexamination report to be adopting this new implementation plan based on the other questions and things we talked about, I don't know if there are any more general recommendations that you wanted to provide for the board or for staff related to kind of where we are with the comp plan from a few years ago.
I would just like to reiterate this, is the result of a very long and involved vetting process. We've had, many workshops. I don't know if you could tell me when we started having the workshops and everything. It's been
Years.
years. Yeah. So this isn't new information that we just came up with a few months ago. This is the result of years of meetings and workshops. I guess if we scroll down to see some of the
Sure.
more of the action summary table.
Yeah, so everything on that in that left column, those are the implementation items, the original 26 from the comprehensive plan. In the comp plan, we had pages on each one of these. And within that page, it outlined some actions. And I'm looking for an example. So I guess here, historic preservation was an item H2. I believe maybe one of the initial actions was to develop a historic preservation plan. So as part of our review of tracking how we've accomplished that, is we actually included the historic preservation planning effort into the South Whitehall landscapes plan. So there we can kind of have this and say that we adopted the South Whitehall landscapes plan, which was to satisfy that initial action. Therefore, it's complete and there's nothing to do on it. But I think it's important to have it on here so that when we start to look at even years from now, tracking what has been done since the initial plan, it's easy to see these were all the actions related to all those things that we heard about from the community in the important efforts of that time.
So question I have is, in terms of, you were mentioning ordinance, saldo and zoning updates, because that's ultimately the code for the township.
Mm-hmm.
I guess where are those items on this summary table?
So
I saw under
in-
open space there was,
yeah, so
There's a couple.
A lot of it are results of other plans, for example. So landscapes plan led us into Jordan Valley overlay. So the Jordan Valley overlay is going to have some saldo updates, zoning updates, use classification. So there'll be a group of ordinance updates associated with that Jordan Valley overlay. Another one I see on the near horizon is saldo updates related to transportation. So phase 2 of the transportation plan is looking at classification of roadways and really tying our saldo design standards to those classifications. So that's kind of one of the other ones that I see coming like right out on the heels of that plan. Other saldo updates are some of the process things that we talked about. And I guess overall, I don't know that we're in a position to, or frankly, need to redo the whole thing. I'm leaning towards the address it as we kind of vet it out and figure out what the best course of action is with those updates. So that we're not just going through and changing it just to change it.
absolutely. Yep.
And that's something that in putting together this sort of broken down action table, you can see that here for saldo updates. It helps us understand too where the priority is in working on some of those items. So for example, Dave mentioned the resource preservation stuff that came out of landscapes plan. That's sort of waiting in the wings. We have the information. We just kind of need the direction and approval to kind of start to put it into Saldo in that process. But one of the items that came up in the comp plan was there were comments about the lighting standards. And we've seen that in past projects of evaluating lighting standards and updating those in Saldo. But so that's in here as something to think about, but it's, should we be putting in the lighting piece of it immediately? Is that something to focus on? Should we be trying to break down understanding staff capacity, timing?
There's only so much time. There's a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. Now that we're at the
in
point
there.
where the rubber meets the road, we kind of need to
Yeah.
figure out how we get things in front of you guys, in front of the BOC, and to plan appropriately. The other thing is use of staff time, use of consultant time. Legal review is certainly, you know, I can see Jennifer looking on this list and having a lot of the same questions of, what's coming up next. But if there's this, also having this sort of format here allows us to, if there becomes another section of Saldo that we find needs to be addressed through, continued land developments coming in, and we see a section of Saldo that we want to update, it's good to kind of put it in here at the reexamination report time, so that we can properly plan for it.
All right. Anyone here or online have any questions or comments? There's a pretty thorough action table that provides some direction for the immediate action items and long-term action items.
It appears daunting, but if you pick off pieces individually, we'll eventually accomplish something. I would like to see the joint meeting of the Planning Commission, the EAC, and the Board of Commissioners happen sooner, just to get their temperature of giving us direction. They're the elected officials, so that's just my thought.
That's a good comment, Brian. So I have that up here, the advisory committee evaluation. So again, that's that breaking down the different articles. That's a really good example of needing to break these down into pieces, into phases, and getting some direction on that. So for example, we did the first couple of articles, the EAC and Shade Tree Commission. So those are marked as complete, but then there's so many others. And as I mentioned earlier, these are kind of puzzle pieces. So it's almost like doing a chunk of a few at a time makes it easier for us to incorporate them into the code. And there could be, for some reason, I don't know what these articles offhand, but say zoning hearing board might be, further down the list. But if there's something immediate that we need to address with zoning hearing board, because of, one reason or another, then maybe that gets higher on our list. What's also in here is, as Brian mentioned, that joint workshop of Board of Commissioners, Planning Commission, and kind of the newer EAC. And we've definitely heard this from the Environmental Advisory Council as well, wanting to get, I think, some more FaceTime with you guys, because they're sort of starting to look at dipping their toes into land development review, and would like to kind of see how that process kind of works. And then also, again, where does all this fit between the priorities of this board and EAC and the Board of Commissioners? And so that's something we've heard from a lot of people.
Brian, we can update that timeline and priority to kind of bump it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone here have any other comments, input? Seems like no. All right. So I think
sorry. This is Jennifer Oliver. I just have one comment. On page 35 of this action summary table, there's a reference to the dissolution of the authority, and the status is marked as complete. I would suggest that is in progress. There is a couple of final steps that need to be taken before that's officially dissolved. So I would ask that that be changed.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's actually one that gets a little confusing on our end, so that's
Okay.
helpful.
Good.
All right, so dissolving the authority, moving that to in progress, and then the joint meeting, accelerating the timeline and increasing the priority, those being the conditions. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Send it to approve. Yep, to the board. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? None opposed? So moved. All right, agenda item number 7, direction and discussion for the transportation plan, phase 1.
So, yeah, we mentioned it a lot that we're working on the transportation plan. The first phase of this is throughout 2024, we did public engagement, pretty extensive public engagement. We worked with Bowman, the consulting team at Bowman. They did a fantastic job. We had over 140 people respond to a survey and some online mapping that actually pointed out areas of concern and areas of potential connections for the active transportation network. This first phase serves as the township's active transportation plan, which is pretty much all non-vehicular use of the roadways and our network. And then it also serves as the safety action plan, which through the Federal Highways Administration and their Safe Streets for All program has a pretty clear guidance on what the safety action plan could do. It's a comprehensive look at your roadway, really a kind of data-driven approach, looking at crash data, historical trends, and so forth, and developing a series of not just identifying, areas of infrastructure need or capital need, but also programs and policy changes related to transportation safety. So that plan is now in its kind of final draft form. It's on the township website. Again, it's been just wonderful working with Bowman. A lot of you, Brian was on the steering committee. Trevor is not here tonight. I saw Monica Hodges from the Board of Commissioners was on that, along with Commissioner Chris Peischel. There's been a lot of people involved. You can see on our steering committee here, a lot of public engagement. We're really happy to see this wrapped up. We are recommending this to the Board of Commissioners on Wednesday for approval. Once this is approved, then it kind of gives, like I mentioned earlier, that guidance for whether it's saldo updates, whether it's some programmatic changes. It also gives us a lot to focus on for future grants and capital improvements. The second phase of the comprehensive transportation plan covers, as Dave sort of mentioned earlier, reclassification of roadways, looking at both their functional class. Are they still functioning, or should they be functioning the way that they were, I believe, when we updated functional class probably over 12 years ago, maybe. An analysis of where freight movement is currently going in the township and what areas of township roadways are more desirable for accommodating freight movement, and other areas that we should definitely consider maybe some restrictions on truck routes and so forth. And then all of that kind of together with traffic and congestion management strategies. So that's being worked on right now. We anticipate to have some of that wrapped up probably by the end of summer. And then that'll kind of give us this full sort of outlook on the transportation plan.
Great, thank you. Agenda item number 8, transportation infrastructure update. Ms. Bett.
Hi guys. So we had talked about this in the past. The township received an RLE grant last year for the Lincoln Avenue traffic signal. We've missed a couple meetings just because of projects getting pulled, but that PennDOT permit got approved back in February of this year. And as you all know probably and have been involved with it, you've seen that the Route 309 and Tillman Street interchange project has really kicked off. I know this week Broadway had closed down. PennDOT periodically provides updates on their website to kind of see the progress of how work goes. Sometimes it's a pain, but we ask, be a little patient or understand that it's temporary, and just be aware of that project moving forward. And that is all I have.
Thank you. We're on agenda item number 9, courtesy of the floor. There's no one here physically in the audience. Is there anyone online that would like to speak? Mr. Manhart.
So just want to give an update of what we're expecting for next month. We have 81 South Cedar Crest Boulevard, so the project right next to the Cedar Crest College. They were here, pretty sure it was a sketch plan when they were last here. They had some submissions, but they may not have actually made it to the board. They're back. It's looking like they'll be on the meeting, and then we just received a resubmission for Parkland High School. Those are the two projects we should see in May already.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? No one else. Then item number 10, adjournment. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Who's in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. So moved.